giving you the insider takes and the big picture view on the Dogs. This is On the Beat, presented by Ingles, with Dog Nation insider Mike Griffith and Cody Chaffins.
Welcome back into On the Beat. Cody Chaffins and Mike Griffith. And yes, it actually is Cody Chaffins on the show this week. I appreciate Kaylee Mansell filling in for the last couple of weeks. And Mike, I thought I was Wally Pipp there for a while.
Yeah, Kaylee did a great job. Got a lot to, you kind of raised the bar here, Cody. We're getting into the spring. We need to see a lot of passion and effort here with G-Day game approaching across the board. Looking for a big performance out of you today.
Passion, fire, and energy, right? Those are the key words of the spring. We'll see if we can provide it today. We're going to talk about a couple of the big questions with 2 weeks left, even less than that till G-Day. As we wind down spring practice, what are our big questions? We're going to hit that. We'll also hit some basketball. Mike got to spend some time at the regional final in Atlanta this week, what he learned there and what that says about Georgia's basketball team. We'll also give a shout out to the Diamond Dawgs, who stay red hot as well. But as we kind of circle in, and we're zeroing in on G-Day and what we think will be a normal G-Day. Kirby, of course, reserves the right to change it at any moment. He let us know that for sure. But the big questions we have going in, Mike, and I think this is a big picture question. Is this Georgia team that is doing spring practice now enough?
Yeah, first of all, we got to redefine enough, because I think with Kirby's back-to-back national championships and, even the 2023 season when they went undefeated, 3 straight regular seasons, that kind of became the norm. I don't know how realistic it was. I mean, certainly that's where the bar is set and that's what you aspire to every year. But as we evaluate Georgia, are we evaluating them against championship standards, or are we evaluating them on 9-10 win season? There's a difference. And I think from a championship standard standpoint, they're not there yet. And I'm taking that from what the head coach told us at the start of spring drills. And even more recently, last Tuesday, I'll be interested to hear his press conference this week. But last week it was, got to get the guys with the passion and the fire and the energy. And Kirby said, I've been asked if I'm a good recruiter. I'd rather get the guys, that motivate themselves. Well, obviously, and I think Georgia by and large does. But the NIL landscape, Cody, it's had a lot of unintended consequences, and paying kids before they perform, paying anybody before they do the job, maybe not the best idea.
Yeah, we talked about it a lot leading into spring practice, Kirby's first press conference, and we talked about how to listen to a press conference, right? And we kind of settled in on you actually do kind of just have to listen to what Kirby Smart has to say, because a lot of times, especially in retrospect, what he says is the truth. We just sometimes don't want to hear it at the moment. And one of the sound bites that you're talking about happened in the second week. He was really kind of ticked off. You could tell something about him. I think it was the second week of spring practice. The practice must not have gone well, and somebody did something. Whether it was people being out of shape, he got on folks about that. But then I want to play the soundbite for you that really kind of stuck with us. Our big takeaway from that soundbite, we'll discuss it afterwards. Here it is.
Guys have always maybe not been used to being coached and being corrected, especially at the volume and level of which we do things. But I think they'll get there. I mean, if they won't, then somebody else will be in their spot.
So we asked the question, is this enough of a team? Well, Kirby Smart gave us the answer. If it's not, somebody else is going to be there.
There is a second portal window coming up after the G-Day game. And a lot of the predictions, that you make or that you hear, based on right now, Cody, I don't think Georgia has enough. Now think about this. Last year, Georgia had an NFL talent at quarterback. Say what you want about Carson Beck or his Instagram or his former girlfriend or his Lamborghini, but the guy had talent. The guy could really chuck the ball, and you saw that. Now, obviously, the receivers didn't always catch it. The tight end room was largely a disappointment, even by their own admission and standard. Offensive line, same. You've got a quarterback now that's yet to exhibit the skills of Carson Beck. From the throwing standpoint, is he a leader? Yeah. Does everybody like him? Sure. Would you let him babysit your kids? Yeah. End of the day, he put up 10 points on Notre Dame with the season on the line. That is a small sample size. That may be unfair, but that is what we have to go on right now. Is it enough at quarterback? How about defensively? We think about the defense last year. They slipped to 34th in the nation against the run, down from 18. Part of that is schedule, no doubt about it, but part of it was a drop-off on interior defensive line talent. Now, there's 3 first-rounders in that front 7. At least that's what they're telling us, right? Or 2 first-rounders in that front 7 with Michael Williams and Jalen Walker. Maybe a first-rounder and Malachi Starks as well. How many first rounders do we see on this defense? Crickets, right? So why do we think that Georgia will be better this year on defense than they were a year ago? Why do we think that the offense will be better this year with Gunnar Stockton than they were with a potential first-round talent in Carson Beck? These are the questions that Kirby and his staff are trying to answer right now. And based on what he told us in those first two press conferences, Georgia is not yet meeting the standard. This leads us to believe that perhaps new personnel could be introduced to the program after spring drills.
We'll talk about the defense in just a minute, but let's start with Gunnar Stockton. I know you and Kaylee kind of hit on this last week. And when you think about Gunnar, I do wonder if we would look at him differently. My mind goes back to the play that got actually hijacked by a walk-on on the sideline, the deep throw to Arian Smith, right? 67 yards. You look back on that play against Notre Dame down the sideline in the second quarter. It's a play where he actually probably should have scored. He should have run away from a guy. It was a beautiful deep pass. Now, of course, it all ends up coming back, and Georgia kicks a field goal, I think, on that drive. But that was a moment to me where there was some great Gunnar Stockton right there, and that gave me moment for hope. There was a couple of other throws early in that game where he hit guys on in-breaking routes, and it was right on time, and he made his progressions. Then there was also like the Texas interception where you're like, ugh. And you had some moments late in that game where Dylan Bell complained that the ball wasn't put in the right spot, whether it was or not. We'll let Kirby Smart determine that. So there's been some up and down, but I wonder, Mike, would your opinion be different had Arian Smith scored on the 67-yard pass?
No, my opinion would be different if you had Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey and Kenny McIntosh and James Cook and Broderick Jones in a returning offensive line instead of one that was replacing four starters. Here's the thing, and let me give you my breakdown on Gunnar Stockton. I think he's got plenty of arm strength. Like he can throw the go ball as well as anybody else. You mentioned the pass to Arian. I think he's got good touch on the short ball. The intermediate passes are the question. You know, the passes that you have to layer the ball in, 10, 15, 20 yards downfield over a defender into coverage. Can he make those throws? I have not seen him do that consistently. Does he have the receivers, Cody, to get the separation? I mean, let's just be honest. Stetson Bennett wasn't always the most accurate guy, but when you had, Brock Bowers and his go-go gadget arms, it didn't matter. He caught balls behind his back, literally, that were thrown all over the place. Ladd McConkey, excellent adjusting to the route as well. A.D. Mitchell. I mean, you had elite talent at the receiver position. You had pass protection. You had good down and distance with a solid run game with future NFL backs like Zamir White and James Cook and Kenny McIntosh. Right now you're down to Nate Frazier and a very questionable offensive line reload going down. Kirby was talking about Drew Bobo the other day, and I think Drew Bobo's come in and done as well as anybody could expect, but is he Jared Wilson? When Kirby says, he's hustling down there, he's 30 or 40 yards downfield, but needs to be more consistent with his snap and needs to get more powerful. That's about 85% of the position is, can you control these dominant D tackles you're going to go up against? Can you be consistent with your snap? One bad snap in a game can make a difference. Very elite and high standards at that center position when we're talking about championship standards. So there are more questions than answers right now for Georgia football. Getting back to Gunnar. This is a guy who knows the offense probably as well as anybody dating back to Jake Fromm. I mean, he's an absolute gym rat when it comes to knowing the film, knowing the progressions. I think he's very good managing players. Kirby talks about the leadership and empowering people around him. But can he make the tough two? I equate it in basketball, right? A lot of guys can stand out there and hit the three. A lot of guys can get to the rim. But who can make the tough two in traffic, the real skill shot, off balance? Can Gunnar Stockton make those difficult throws? And can he put a team on his shoulders when all else fails? He's not Lenore Sellers. I don't think he's DJ Lagway either. Garrett Nussmeier would seem to look better on paper. How far down do we go where we rank Gunnar Stockton among SEC quarterbacks? And if we get into that middle, is he Nico? Is he 6? Is he 7? Is he 8? And now you're talking about trying to win games with a quarterback who, compared to his contemporaries, is only mid-level. Well, let's look at the supporting cast. We talked about it. You're bringing in some receivers from the outside. Surely the receivers will be better than they were. Will there be the elite receivers that Stetson Bennett had to throw to? Doubtful. How does the running game look? Will this offensive line be better than last year's? Will they be just as good? Considering the talent that's going out the door, I think that's a real question. Can these guys fill the shoes and be as good as last year? Perhaps. Will they be better? Maybe a little bit of a stretch. The running game, you're a little thin in those ranks. Kirby told us he doesn't know about the Robinsons, with their injuries, whether it's Rod coming back from the toe or Branson from the knee. What we know is you have Frazier, who I think is proven and very good, potential All-SEC. You have Cash Jones, who I think is an excellent third down back, very clutch player. And you have Bo Walker, an incoming freshman. How much is fair to ask of him? When Frazier was a 5-star, he did this. Can we expect Walker to be as good as Frazier was last year? Not sure about that. I'd say probably doubtful. The tight end room, disappointment last year. I do expect them to take a step forward. I know, Cody, that you were very cognizant of some comments that Oscar Delp made recently in press conferences with Kirby. So when I look across the board and I look at what's leaving and I look at what's coming up, to our knowledge and based on what the head coach has said, is there really any reason to believe that next year's team will be better than this year's team? And is that enough?
That is the big question. I do wonder. I mean, you talk about the transfer portal, and to me, with Gunner, are we where we are? Like, can this change? Are you going to bring in a guy in a spring portal who would be ready to start games by the fall? He's not going to, like you said, he's not going to surpass Gunner Stockton with the knowledge, right? So this would have to be an incredible athlete who would go out there and give you a chance to make some plays. So that's the only thing. I feel like you can bring in a receiver. And as we saw, it even takes some time for those guys. But you can say, hey, run a go route and we'll get it to you, right? You can bring in a pass rusher, off the edge and kind of get him in some situations where he can play. For a quarterback, that seems like a tough call to bring in a guy out of this spring portal and expect him to really compete for the job.
Well, it does, but it's happening around the country when you get the right guy. And it's hard to get the right guy. They cost a lot of money. And a lot of Georgia fans, and again, I'm not trying to say the sky is falling. This is still a great program. This is still a program that can win an SEC championship. But if we're being realistic, the margin for error is shrinking. It shrunk last year. There were 3 games last year, Cody, that easily could have gone the other way or gone either way, right? Kentucky, Georgia Tech, and Alabama. And Georgia won 2 of those 3 games. They could have easily lost all 3 or won all 3, depending on how you look at it. But I think it's fair to say that the talent disparity is not what it was because of the NIL and because of the portal. And a lot of guys that would be 2s and 3s at Georgia are choosing to transfer somewhere else where they can play a bigger role and get paid sooner.
Yeah, I like the way you said it. It really is champagne problems. Like, we're not saying this is a Georgia team that can't have a winning record, right? We are asking, is this enough to win a national championship, which
Correct.
is become the standard, and let's make that clear as we put this all out there. You talked about the defense a little bit and some of the guys that are coming back and who needs to step up, and you guys did a whole segment on that last week. My question to you, Mike, is, and even with the offense and maybe the Noah Thomas and Zachariah Branch of this, is there something that can happen April 12th on G-Day that will calm your nerves? Or will we say, you know what, he's playing against a secondary that lost Dan Jackson and Malachi Starks, so what does that really mean? Or these pass rushers, they had sacks, but, was it really a sack because they don't take down the quarterback in spring? So is there anything that can make you rest easier after the spring game?
Kirby Smart's press conference. I want to hear what Kirby says. A lot of the things that we're saying, when we say them as analysts, people get upset. Oh my gosh, don't you like Georgia? Or, man, you're saying. I'm merely repeating what the head coach has told us in press conferences about Georgia not meeting the standard, about not having the fire and passion across the board, and some questions at the start of practice about the freshman conditioning and the effort and the coachability. These were things that were identified by the head coach. And when the head coach identifies these things, to me, that is cause for concern. Now, you have 15 spring practices to make a lot of progress and to make a lot of decisions. I think this will lead to more portal action for Georgia. And in terms of what they get, I don't know what's out there, and I don't know the payroll. I know this: on April 7th, this house settlement's going to happen, and suddenly there's going to be a salary cap. So if Georgia's going to do something with money, big money shifts, they want to do it now, before that takes effect in the fall. So I'm poised for that. Maybe Kirby goes out and lands a couple whales, or maybe not. Maybe Kirby says, you know what, I like the way these guys progressed. I feel like we made the necessary progress. I feel like we're meeting the standard. That's what settles my nerves, is listening to Kirby Smart and reporting off of what he tells me. I think he's the best coach in college football, Cody. I think he's the best talent evaluator in college football. But when Kirby says that they're not meeting the standard, I take him at his word. He's not one to just throw things out there. Now, some people say, oh, every spring he's got something. He does have something every spring. I mean, that's the objective. That's the goal, to get better everywhere. But there's different degrees of that. And I think you and I would both agree that Kirby Smart has voiced some frustration and concerns that we have not heard before.
Yeah, it definitely does have a different tone to it than it has in years past. Talk about the house settlement. My mind goes back to during the season. We did our boots on the ground segment. Maybe we'll have some after G-Day. Looking forward to sharing some of that video I get with you. And it was before the Texas game where we saw Kirby kind of glad-handing a little bit, right? He was talking to the Nike CEO. He was talking to some of the folks who donate to the program before the game because they were there because it was the biggest game in the country that day. And one thing you said after, you said, Cody, remember, this is a guy who has a degree from the Terry College of Business. And so when we think about the house settlement, we think about a potential salary cap. This is a person in Kirby Smart who has a business mind. And there was a report from On3 that Georgia may be willing to spend more last week moving forward on NIL. But when you have a head coach with a business-type mind, it seems to me, and based on the comments that we just played from Kirby Smart, this is a guy who doesn't want to waste money. And if he's going to be spending NIL money, he wants to be getting something back for it.
Oh, no question. But you can see the model. You can see what Ole Miss did with the players they acquired in their front seven, certainly. And you can see the success that Ohio State had with the transfers they attained. So, getting mid-level or mediocre or guys just to fill spots isn't enough. You need greatness. Greatness wins championships. I think Stetson Bennett was the one that famously told us it's players, not plays. And at the time, it appeared to be a cheap shot at Todd Monken. But in hindsight, I think Stetson was right. I think if there was another Ladd McConkey or Brock Bowers coming out that tunnel, I think our conversation would probably be different about the dynamics of the offense and the play calling. But when you got guys dropping passes and not executing, you don't have the same response to the play calling. Well, it's a bad play. If it doesn't work, it's a good play if it does. It's really not that simple. It has to do with execution, and it has to do with quality of talent. It also has to do with quality of depth. We've seen Georgia lose guys before and not miss a beat. So, oh my gosh, the next linebacker they threw in, he's former future first-round draft pick, or the next cornerback, or the next running back, or the next offensive lineman. That collection of talent is no longer there because of the NIL and the portal, and that's the reality that Kirby Smart lives in. So you have to have enough frontline players, you have to keep them healthy, and then you have to be able to coach up those freshmen quickly. I think Georgia has an excellent freshman class. I really do. I think Kirby's leaning hard on them because he's going to need them faster and in a more prevalent manner than in the past, because those 2s and 3s don't always stick around. You don't have the same level of development as next man up. So I do like what they did with their freshman class. That was step one. The portal, it appears they've addressed some concern at receiver. We haven't seen those guys firsthand yet, but all reports have been pretty positive. They need to get up to Georgia speed and get used to practicing at this caliber of practice. It is another level. It is one of the hardest practices out there, if not the hardest, according to NFL personnel talking to other coaches and Kirby. And it's a matter of meeting the standard. If anybody knows what it will take to win a championship, it's Kirby Smart.
Yeah, you talked about the spring portal. To me, the depth is the question, what you can fill in the spring portal. If you've got a guy who's now gone through 2 spring practices and a fall camp and a season, and he's not helping you out, and you realize he is not the depth that you need, I can see that being a spot where Kirby definitely makes some moves to get some guys in who can be depth pieces, because injuries are going to happen. We see it every year, and they're playing more games than they ever have. So to me,
and you need your frontline players to be great. This is probably unfair, but I'll throw it out there. Colby Young had a jump ball with a game on the line. Does George Pickens make that catch? I think he does. Does Colby Young? No. The Alabama defensive back wins the battle. Didn't adjust on the ball. Not saying it was a perfect ball from Carson. Could have been better. But does an elite receiver make that catch? Do you win that game with an elite receiver? Is Colby Young an elite receiver? Does he elevate to that? We know he did some good things last year before he was suspended. But ultimately, you've got to have the players make the plays. Conversely, does Colby Young make the catch against Alabama that A.D. Mitchell did in the national championship game? Maybe, maybe not. These are the kind of decisions and these are the type of plays that are going to ultimately decide whether you win a championship. Again, you said it earlier. I'm going to repeat it again. We're not saying the sky's fallen. We're not saying Georgia's not going to beat Florida, Tennessee, Auburn, or be competitive, or even play in the SEC championship game. What we're saying is that based on what we saw last year from the Ohio State, that is what it's going to take, is playmakers. Does Georgia have the playmakers? Does Georgia have the quarterback, if they don't have the playmakers, who can elevate his game and take over a game a la Lenore Sellers, or perhaps maybe to a lesser degree DJ Lagway?
So we hit it pretty hard right there. The big question on the field is this team enough? Got another big question that we want to talk about. We're also going to hit some basketball later on in the show and some Georgia baseball. But first, let's take our first break here on The Beat, presented by Ingles.
It's the moment you dream of, the moment you work for, train for, run wind sprints when nobody's watching for, the moment when hours of gym time, court time, prep time all culminate into this time, the moment when millions of bounces, blocks, and boards all add up to this, your moment. Ingles, we're with you every step of the way.
Welcome back into On the Beat. Cody Chaffins and Mike Griffith with you. We're talking about some of the big questions as we head towards G-Day coming up on April 12th inside Sanford Stadium. And we talked about kind of on the field, and is this team enough, and are there enough playmakers? And I think that is all very relevant, very big questions that we have to answer. But I will tell you, another thing stood out to me. We've actually gotten to hear from a lot of Georgia players this spring. Kirby Smart just keeps pumping them out. And when he's done that, there's a lot of interviews going on, a lot of sound bites going out there. There's a couple that kind of stuck with me as I listened to them, and it kind of leads me into the second question, which is, where is this team mentally? Because we heard from a couple of players heading into last season, it didn't seem like their head was in the right place. Take a listen to Monroe Freeling and Oscar Delp as they kind of describe where their heads were a year ago at this time.
I think we thought we were more just senior heavy, so I think we thought we were there. But I really think that we should have focused more on our fundamentals.
Just listen to the outside noise. I kind of struggled with, looking at my phone too much when I should have been looking at it and looking at things that people are saying about me and about potential things. I'm not saying I was planning on leaving or anything, but, I'd be lying if I didn't hear those things, from just people talking to my family and me. And, I'm just focusing on Georgia right now. So.
It was really shocking, that they would say that in front of everybody, right? So that, maybe we won't see Monroe Freeling for another interview for a little bit of time. But the other thing is, hearing Monroe Freeling say, yeah, we thought we were there. Thought we were going to roll the football out. And we had seniors, so we were going to be all right. Then you hear Oscar Delp saying, yeah, I was eating all the rat poison that Nick Saban likes to call it. That doesn't sound like Georgia to me.
Didn't sound like Georgia on a lot of those podcasts that the players did either. There was a lot of laughing and horsing around and a comfort level and, from a program that would ultimately lose 3 games. I do realize that that's a part of it, but it makes me wonder where the mindset was and the focus was. And gosh, that's 2 hours that somebody could have been on a practice field instead of doing a podcast. I think these are questions that when you don't win, get asked. You get held to a higher degree of scrutiny. What the players said, Oscar and Monroe, doesn't bother me. And the reason why, Cody, is because the first step to recovery and the first step to improvement is accountability and realizing that what you were doing and who you were wasn't good enough. So once you're able to stand in front of the room and acknowledge that and admit that, that lends to the second step, which is improvement and renewed effort and enthusiasm. So I think part of the reason I think Kirby's sending these players out there is they can hear themselves talk, number one, and hear themselves tell the media and fans, because it's really not talking to the media, it's talking to the fans. All we are is, kind of a lens, if you will, a way for the program to reach out to the fans. And it's our responsibility and obligation to do our jobs properly and ask the right questions so the players can give the right answers and maybe find their way to a more successful season next year. It's hard to imagine because I thought last year was incredible under the circumstances and maybe Kirby Smart's best job. But I digress. I like the accountability. That's where it starts. And when you've had a lot of success and you've had a lot of players that maybe have been riding the coattails of other great leaders, Maybe the leadership isn't quite as good because you're not pressed into action as soon. There's somebody else that'll get it done. There's somebody else that'll lead. I think what's happening now is a lot of these guys like Oscar and Monroe are looking around the room and realizing it's on me. It's up to me to lead. And what does that mean? Not just taking care of my business, but how do I influence others? And how do I affect others? And what is the team mindset? And are there distractions? And if so, how do the players go about eliminating those distractions? The coaches only have them a certain number of hours per week. And I think there's only so much Kirby can do. And that makes it all the more important that you have great leadership within. And I think that's one of the major things that's going to happen for the Dogs this spring is for those leaders to emerge, to acknowledge that what they did before wasn't good enough, and to take action and take it upon themselves to improve the level of play, the accountability, the responsibility, the effort, the passion around them in the locker room.
I like the way you said that, how acknowledging it is not a bad thing. And that is good to hear. When you talk about this Georgia team, it was also interesting to hear so many of the players go up to the mic and say, you know what? I don't have a national championship ring. Like all these guys who were here last year, they at least had one. A lot of them had 2 championship rings. You know what? I don't have one now because this team, and Kirby Smart has said, this is the youngest team that he's had or the least amount of spring practices, which means these guys aren't national champions. These guys that are in the locker room now, they've got to earn that right to be called national champions. And that was another thing to me that stuck out. That was really good to hear, like a guy like Lawson Lucky saying, I'm not a national champion, and I want to get there. That makes me hungrier.
Yeah, that's important. It's important that that's the priority instead of the check they're cashing or the car they're driving. I mean, because that's the unintended consequence of the NIL, right, is to get rewards before you actually accomplish something. And it's a challenge for coaches to motivate players who have other options. Well, coach, I don't like the way you're coaching me, or I don't think I can get paid enough, and I can go over here to school A, B, or C and get more money and not get leaned on as hard. That's why it's important to recruit players that want to be leaned on, that want to be coached hard. And I'll kind of zig a little bit here, covering the regional, and I know we're going to talk more about this later, but Tom Izzo talked about how the great players are the ones that want to be coached hard. The great players are the ones that realize the value of a Final Four instead of who may be making offers for them in the portal, which is currently open. And I think that's the mindset that every coach strives to have on his team and in his program. When you talk about connectivity, there's 2 kinds, obviously on the field and how well these players work together, but off the field as well. Are these players willing to band together for a greater cause, a greater interest? Does it matter to them to represent the G and get their championship? Because they may have already figured it out. I've covered enough football to know this. Whether I'm talking about the 1993 Auburn team that went 11-0, the 1998 team that Tennessee that went 13-0, or the Michigan State Rose Bowl Spartans of 2013, those players are remembered forever. They're a legacy. But pick another year, and how much do you really remember? Not much. Those players that win titles, people will never forget Stetson Bennett. People will never forget Jordan Davis. People will never forget James Cook. They'll never forget Brock Bowers. Their names etched in gold forever. They're legends. But what's Carson Beck's legacy going to be at the end of the day, right? What's the legacy of Oscar Delp right now? How many people will remember C.J. Allen? How many people are going to remember Christian Miller? This is up to these players to carve their legacy, not just for now, not just for the NIL dollars, and not just for this season in NFL draft stock, but after their playing careers are finished, which could be 2 years, 4 years, 6 years. They got a long life left ahead of them. And how will they be remembered on the Georgia campus? Are they going to be buying somebody lunch 10 years from now, or is somebody going to be buying their lunch?
Yeah, all those guys in Philadelphia, there's a lot of lunches getting bought for the Nolan Smiths and the Keely Ringos of the world. If we're going to talk about mentality, we should talk about, does it worry you at all when another guy's going 100 miles an hour on the loop around Athens? Does that speak to the mentality of this team?
Yeah, it does, unfortunately. And the scary thing to me, as someone in the media and looking at this from 10,000 feet, as I evaluate other programs and other instances I've seen in my career, now I want to be clear that the current crop of players has a much, much, much higher degree of scrutiny than ever before because of our technology and because of our social media channels, because of our cell phones that we can hold right up and say, oh, there he is. I'm sure, and I'm not throwing anybody or any program under the bus, but I'm sure things were just as bad in the 1990s or the 1980s. You just didn't see it, right? You just, and it wasn't national. It was more of a local, and let's keep this quiet. You don't really know what's happening at the neighboring state. Now you're on blast globally. So a much, much, much higher degree of scrutiny, a much, much higher level of responsibility is needed. Now, dialing it down to the Georgia driving issues, the question that I ask and myself and have a degree of concern with, when I think about the SEC Mount Rushmore, I don't think there's any question that Kirby Smart is on that SEC Mount Rushmore right now. He's won 2 national titles, after all. Do you know who else won 2 national titles? Urban Meyer. We don't talk about him on the Mount Rushmore. If we go back and look at the success that Urban Meyer had in that brief period, it was pretty impressive. Those Gators were awful good, but there was enough things that happened off the field that damaged that image, that damaged that era of Florida football. Steve Spurrier won 1 national title, and yet if you go to Gainesville, there's no question who the most celebrated coach is. Now, Spurrier did kind of revolutionize the SEC in the 1990s, but point being, off-field issues do affect the perception of a program. And I'm not saying that Georgia is completely smeared by the off-field driving incidents, but I do think the level that it's raised to, when we're talking about 107 miles an hour, someone driving into a building, certainly raises a lot of concern, not just within the program, but outside the program. The rivals see this, they know this, they blast it on social media. It damages the image that Kirby Smart and so many players have worked so hard to build, not just as a program that wins titles and produces NFL talent, but produces strong, capable, positive, responsible young men. You know, and there's far, 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 far more of those than the players who've gone astray. I mean, you look at the Ladd McConkeys, you look at the Brock Bowers, you look at N'Kobe Dean, Jordan Davis, Lewis Seen. You think about all these good character players that were Nolan Smith, that were leaders at the University of Georgia, did so many positive things, not just on the field and off the field. But when the negative headlines start outweighing the positive headlines, there's concern. Now, I want to say this, and I know I'm kind of carrying on a little bit here. I know my producer, Jay's probably not real thrilled with that, but Jay, bear with me for just another minute. I think that Kirby Smart certainly is the head coach of the program and is ultimately responsible. But I think we would be remiss if we didn't consider the role society plays in this. And here's what I mean. It's not Kirby's job to be God and be a patrolman as well as a head football coach. It's not Kirby's job to set up the rules and the penalties and the punishments and the bail amounts and the amount of time someone spends in jail for reckless driving. That's the job of the local prosecutor. I don't want to go too far into politics, but at some point you need to ask yourself about the legal system and are there enough consequences? And ask yourself this too. If you got caught going 100 miles an hour on the interstate, would you lose your job? Would you think it was fair if you did? The answer is probably no. So are we holding these players to a different standard than we would a regular employee? And after all, aren't they employees right now? So there's a lot of philosophical ways to go with this. My point is, it's not all about Kirby and what he allows or doesn't allow, or Josh Brooks or the University of Georgia. This is as much a societal element, particularly in Atlanta. It doesn't have to be a Georgia player going by at 100 miles an hour. That's happening all over Atlanta. I talked to some friends this weekend. This is a societal issue, particularly in the metro Atlanta area, that I think is spread into Georgia, and it's really complex as far as what Georgia should, shouldn't do, can, and can't do. I think the legal system bears some responsibility in this as well.
Yeah, I think it is complicated. I think back to my college. There's not a person I know who did not get a ticket in college speeding to or from Athens on 316 or Highway 78. I also didn't have a car if it was going over 100 miles an hour, parts were falling off. So I didn't have access to be somewhere like that. It's interesting, too, when you talk about teams getting up to things and how it was different. My mind goes back to like the 1980s and like Frank Ross, who went on to have this incredible career as a businessman at Coca-Cola, was known before that as, they had the pig incident. back in the 1980s, and Scott Warner's written about that on DogNation.com, where they stole a pig from the Ag Center. You think about Jake Scott riding the motorcycle up on top of Stegman Coliseum. What would have happened in the Twitter days of that if Georgia, if that gets out and how that spreads around? So it definitely is a different day and time than we've ever dealt with in college athletics.
Yeah, and still at the end of the day, it's something that Georgia is very serious about. I know they're doing everything they can to address it. It's something that I think is being talked about in the Georgia community, particularly locally, because it doesn't just affect the team; it affects the citizens. Right? It's a danger to the society when this thing's going like this. So it is complicated. I know that Kirby Smart is doing everything he can. I know that he's more bothered by this than anyone. The fact that Kirby is a Georgia graduate who does have children and treats all these players like his children. It wasn't so long ago that I was interviewing Dwan Mathis' dad in tears, and he was telling me how Kirby saved his son's life. And at a time when we didn't even know Dwan could play football again, Kirby was going up to his room and assuring him the best care on the planet. So, this is a coach that cares about his players, and this is a coach that takes everything personal where Georgia's involved, and he's doing everything he can. And then you ask yourself about consequences, right? Well, if you let this guy go, he's probably going to sign somewhere else. You're probably going to have to compete against him. You're going to lose hours and hours and hundreds of thousands of dollars that you've invested in these players. At what point are you willing to punt the player? Does it set an example necessarily? Would you want your kid to be the example when so many others were allowed to stay? It's a real slippery slope. Again, it's very complicated. The one thing I think everyone agrees on is that it does need to get fixed and it needs to be changed. And I'm going to dial it back to what I was talking about before we brought up the driving. Internally, players, leadership, accountability to your teammates, accountability to the mission statement to bring Georgia back to the top of college football. Those are the things that have to outweigh the thrill or the joy or the excitement that you get temporarily from driving that fast, which quite frankly, I don't even get. I got in an electric car and I thought my heart was going to stop how fast that thing accelerated. So I'm not even sure how much excitement and pleasure you get it going over 100 miles an hour. It scared the hell out of me, and I want to be around tomorrow. So there's a degree of common sense involved in this too. Ultimately, though, it's going to come down to these players holding one another accountable. They either will or they won't, Cody.
That is one of the big questions as we round out spring practice and head towards G-Day. We're going to talk some Georgia basketball, Georgia baseball coming up in just a minute. But before we do, I want to thank the Finnish Long Drink for being a sponsor of On the Beat tonight. As we head into the spring, there is no better beverage to enjoy responsibly than the Finnish Long Drink. You may be out at tailgate and you're thinking, it's a little hot. Beer might weigh me down a little bit. How about something light and sparkling? How about the pre-made cocktail in the blue can? That is the Finnish Long Drink. Since 1952, they've been drinking them over in Helsinki, Finland. And you can see it's a little bit of sweet in with a gin cocktail and a grapefruit twist. They've also got other flavors for you if grapefruit not your thing, cranberry, pineapple, and the peach flavor, which I enjoyed last summer on the beach. It's perfect because you're not trying to mix a drink on the run. No, you want to have a cocktail, but you don't want to have to be fumbling with a bottle and figuring out measurements. No, just open the cooler and pop a top. It's great for playing golf, great for home tailgates, grilling out, being by the pool this time of year. It is perfect for spring. So check out the Finnish Long Drink to figure out where you can find some of the Finnish Long Drink. Go to thelongdrink.com. Well, on the beat, sometimes you head off and do different things. And for Mike, it was the regional final in Atlanta this week. And it had an SEC feel for sure with Ole Miss and Auburn in the building at State Farm Arena. I still want to say Phillips Arena after all these years at State Farm Arena. So, Mike, how was it? How being there for Auburn, making their way to the Final Four?
It was fantastic. I mean, the Auburn fans really represented. I thought Ole Miss represented as well. I was very impressed with Coach Beard and the game that he gave Michigan State. Michigan State is a proven program. They are extremely well coached, and Ole Miss took them right to the end. It was an outstanding game. Certainly Auburn, with what Bruce Pearl's done there, I think that provides hope that it can happen at Georgia with the right players. And I think Mike White took a big step this year with the season that the Bulldogs had. I know it didn't finish like you wanted it to, but all you had to do is look at Alabama and see when you hit those threes, man, you can beat a lot of teams. You go flat, you can get beat pretty badly. And unfortunately, Georgia did not shoot the ball well against Gonzaga. And Gonzaga, also worth noting, was definitely underseeded. That was not an 8 seed team that they played. It was more like a 3. Excellent team that Mark Few had, took Houston, down to the wire as well. So I think in totality, we have to look at the Georgia season and recognize what a giant step they took. I mean, getting ranked, Cody, for the first time in 13 years, beating a top 5 team for the first time since 2003, reaching the NCAA tournament for the first time in 10 years. There was so many positive. Beating the Florida Gators. You look at Florida, they've won 10 in a row. The last team to beat them, Georgia, beat that Florida team. Georgia took Auburn to the buzzer in Stegman Coliseum and gave Auburn all they wanted in their supposed jungle down there at Auburn. So Georgia maybe not quite as far off as a lot of people thought. Now, all that said, throw the cards up in the air. We know that Asa Newell is more than likely, surely moving on to the NBA. Any team would want this guy. He was a class representation and gave his fans a tremendous season. I think Georgia also set a record for number of wins at Stegman Coliseum this year. Had a pretty impressive home win court streak too. So Asa did his job. Silas Demery Jr., a guy that's gone in the portal, will he transfer somewhere else? Is he going to test the NBA draft waters? Will he return? Remains to be seen. The one thing I do know, having covered SEC basketball since 1993 and seen Mike White as a player and now as a coach, is he's going to put good people around him. He's going to recruit a good class. Next year's Georgia team is going to be long and athletic and play really good defense, and there's going to be some excellent players. Hopefully Blue Cane sticks around, Dylan James, maybe Silas comes back. You want to have that core of great players. But I like the culture that Mike has built. We were talking a minute ago about coaches and how they affect their team. I think about retention, and I think about now how important it is that players like their coach and believe in their coach. And I think Mike White is that guy. I mean, the evidence is there. They had a stretch where they went 2-9. They bounced back and won 4 straight games. The buy-in and the connectivity was there. That is built by the head coach. So I think Mike has proven himself capable. I think Georgia's budget may not be at the top of the league, may not be John Calipari's $10 million in Arkansas, but I think it will be competitive enough for Mike to continue to get good players, and I expect the team to make the NCAA tournament next season, and I don't even know who's going to be on it. That's how much confidence that I've got in Mike White.
Yeah, there was a lot of lamenting during this NCAA tournament about how the lower seeds, some of these mid-majors, they're never going to be able to be that Cinderella again because, some of the big programs. Well, if you're Georgia, you want to be that big program, right? Like you want to be the one picking off some of these great players who made great runs for some of these mid-major teams.
Well, they're Cinderella. They're just wearing uniforms now. I mean, 4 out of 5 of Florida's starters are transfers. 4 out of 5 of Auburn's starters. I mean, you look in the rotations for these teams, and there was really only a couple teams in the Sweet 16 built organically, the Elite 8, Duke and Michigan State. Your traditional blue bloods are the ones that can still do it. And I don't even know if State really had enough talent to be there. I think Izzo probably did a great coaching job getting them that far because I felt like Auburn's talent completely outclassed them. So this is the new way, is free agency and reloading your roster and going out there and finding the talent and then developing it. And I thought Mike did a really nice job when I look at Tyron Lawrence and Dakota LaFeu. I thought those were some really good pieces that he added through the portal. And I think there's going to be more of those guys now that they've seen the success that Georgia can have. This is also a big reason why it was a big step. You can come to Georgia and make the NCAA tournament. We've seen that. You can come to Georgia and play for Mike White and beat a number 1 seed Florida. You can come to Georgia and play for Mike White, and if you make a 2-footer take over a number 1 team like Auburn into overtime, you can come and play for Mike White and beat a Rick Pitino coach St. John's team that was a number 2 seed. You can come and play for Mike White and be ranked and be drafted into the NBA like Asa Newell will in the first round. So there were so many positives, and play in front of a stacked house, right, where the fans line up around the building and where Georgia basketball means something once again. So last year cannot be understated in terms of the progress it made and the advertisement that it is for the next potential transfers that are looking at Georgia, measuring their offer from Georgia against maybe another school.
Yeah, and the Dogs fans certainly did their part, and Mike White plenty to sell. You talk about reloading with the transfer portal. Well, I don't know anybody's done it better than Wes Johnson and the Georgia Diamond Dawgs. They stay red hot now, 28-2. They have swept ranked SEC teams in back-to-back weekends for the first time since 2008. And boy, we all remember 2008 and Gordon Beckham and the run to Omaha and what should have been a national championship that year. But boy, Wes Johnson has done it with this team, at least so far, it looks like.
Well, I remember last year. I remember being one game away from Omaha last year and what the Wizard did. You know, they call him the Wizard. And I keep doubling down on the nickname because this is one of the most incredible rebuilds I've ever seen and probably one of the best hires any athletic director's ever made. I don't know another AD that's hired a first-time coach who was 51 years old. That's never been a head coach that had the level of success that Wes Johnson did. I think you got to give Josh Brooks a big assist here. You look at Foley Field and you look at the improvements. I don't know if you've been there, Cody, of late. It's an incredible environment. I'll take Foley Field, over a Braves game if I'm going as a fan any day of the week, just from the sight lines and the ease and just the environment of it and the meaning of these games. SEC baseball, this is a big deal, right? It just means more, right? I mean, there's a shorter schedule. The games are more important. You're watching players develop right before your eyes. And it's awesome. Like you said, the sweep of Auburn was unbelievable. I'm looking at their schedule right now. Looks like a midweek game with some Charlotte team and then a big series. Oh my goodness, they go to Texas this week.
It doesn't get easy.
Can it be just like football and just like basketball? Are they going to go? Is baseball going to carry on? And is Georgia going to continue to be an absolute nightmare for Texas? You got to kind of enjoy that a little bit, right? I mean, being a thorn in Texas's side while you can. I mean, here's this school with all this money and all these resources. And, Georgia's just been the biggest pain in the ass Texas has ever dealt with. And maybe the Georgia base, we'll find out. They'll go on the road. And what's exciting about it to me, knowing the coach that Wes is and the staff he's put together, these guys are going to get better. They're going to get better. As the year goes on, they will get better and better and better. Wes will continue to dial them in. The more metrics that he has to work with, the more film, the more swings he can look at, the more pitching rotations. And now they have the technology with the pitching lab, and they have the facilities with the baseball. There's no reason why Georgia couldn't win a national championship in baseball this season. I mean, we're already assuming that they're going to go to Omaha. Why? Because they tell us that. You're not supposed to do that, right? Kirby, one game at a time. Mike Waite, focus on the process. Georgia baseball, yeah, we're going to be in Omaha. You bet, we're going to be there. And they just go out there and they play so carefree and with so much fun, and they're so deep, and they genuinely pull for one another. You don't see those jealousies. They got a loud dugout. They've got depth. They've got development. They've got youth. They've got the free agents. It's amazing. The transformation is just incredible. So a lot of excitement there for the Georgia baseball team. We'll see what they do at Texas. Hey, if they lose one or two, I'm not worried about it, right? It's Wes Johnson. They're on the road. But going down there and beating the Florida Gators like that, I don't think they'd won a series there in, 19 years? To your point, 23 transfers from 18 different schools. This is the new game. This is what NIL's brought us. And Georgia's here for it. We talked about Kirby's ability. We saw what Mike White did last year, and we certainly know what Wes Johnson can do.
Yeah, you talk about the hire, and it wasn't like Scott Strickland. Like, they were making the tournament, right? It was just a different level that Wes Johnson has brought him to. So kudos to Josh Brooks for making that hire. I personally think they probably put a little pressure on the folks down on North Avenue as well, as we see their longtime head coach who has been kind of at that level. We're going to make the tournament, but we're not, hadn't made noise in a while. I wonder how much pressure that put on them down there. The other thing that I love about Georgia baseball over the weekend, that it was Dan Jackson who walked him off coming up on Saturday. You got to love that. Not the same Dan Jackson, obviously, but a guy from Atlanta, North Springs High School, transfer from Wofford, and got another Dirty Dan doing dirty deeds.
Yeah, you got to like that. Certainly part of the folklore at Georgia. And it is a lot of fun, and that is the name of the game over there. And, this is where I give a shout out to some other media contemporaries. I don't know how many people can make the games, but if you can't, I highly recommend Jeff Dantzler and David Johnston's call. I mean, these guys are so good. I know you know them, Cody. You've been in the business a long time. These guys are Cracker Jacks and very entertaining. So they've kind of got the whole product going. I'd say the same for Scott Hauer and Eric Zier as well. I mean, I love their calls, and Eric probably, grimaces every time I quote him off the radio, but he does such a good job breaking it down. And he's got it like that with Kirby. Eric can be critical of the quarterbacks, and Kirby will go, yep, that's what happened. A lot of places they're like, fire that guy if he's critical. And he's not Eric's not easy. He's been around. He's a legend. Kirby knows who he is, what he is. I think Eric's one of the best color guys in college football, period. If he wanted to work for a network, he could. Probably making a lot more money in banking, though. But another one of those hidden gems that makes Georgia so special, whether we're talking football, whether we're talking basketball, whether we're talking baseball, this program right now, the momentum that Georgia has under Josh Brooks, You'd be hard-pressed to find that many other places. Again, it's not perfect. We talked about some incidents earlier in the show and some issues. All schools have issues. The question is, are you capable of handling it? Do you have the leadership in place? And at Georgia, the answer is yes.
Yeah, I do love Dave Johnston and Jeff Dance. Traveled to Omaha with them in 2006. I was covering that Georgia team.
All right, there's a story. I like that.
There's some good guys, yeah, and they make you feel at home when you're listening. The way they shout everybody out from all over the state who are listening. So love turning those guys on when you get the chance. All right, appreciate it, Mike. What a big week it has been. Hopefully the pollen. You've been in the South a long time. Does it still get to you, this pollen?
I'm smart enough to stay out of it now, but I did see that there were record levels of it just a couple of days ago. So that outdoor jog becomes an indoor jog. And in days where it's raining like today, I welcome the rain, knock the pollen out of the air, right? So, yeah, I mean, it's a temporary situation. This is a great place to live. You know that, Cody. We love living in the Southeast. We wouldn't be here. But like anywhere else, there's days you got to be smart. And when that pollen count gets high, that's one of them. Or when that heat can get deadly, you just got to be smart about it. And fortunately, we're pretty well equipped in the Athens area as well as a lot of the places in Atlanta.
Yeah, we'll get through it all together. Appreciate it, Mike. And looking forward to next week. Well, as we get closer and closer to G-Day, a lot more storylines to talk about. That's going to do it for this week. It's On the Beat.